Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode Around the Fire on Spirit Reflections. I am Fred Govea. For those that are here for the first time, Spirit Reflections is an ongoing series of bilingual conversations in English and Portuguese about people's personal and spiritual journeys, the tools that they found along the way, and how those tools shaped who they are and the work that they do today. We interview artists, philosophers, scientists, and religious people of all traditions to discover a little bit more about them and in the process get to know ourselves. So, if you're here for the first time, please like and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. If you feel somebody can benefit from these conversations, please send the channel to them. And if you'd like to know more about Spirit Reflections events, workshops that we're going to be hosting, all you have to do is go to spiritreflections.org and you can subscribe to our newsletter so that you can stay on top of all of our upcoming events. So, my guest tonight, I'm very honored to have here in the program, is Susan Ulfelder. Susan's complete bio you can find in the description of the video below, but I'm going to read a abbreviated version. She's the founder of the Hellinger Institute of Washington, D.C., and is one of the most renowned leaders and teachers of Bert Hellinger's Family Constellations work in the English-speaking world. She's a traditional naturopath and hands-on healer with decades of experience in the Barbara Brennan School of Healing, as well as healing modalities that include flower essences, essential oils, tuning forks, Kabbalistic healing, and Jin Shin Jyutsu, and I hope I pronounced that right. Susan has been trained in family constellations directly from Bert Hellinger, Dietrich Klinghardt, and Harold Hoenen and Hunter Beaumont since 1998, and she has sponsored several workshops with Hellinger in the United States over the years. She has founded the Hellinger Institute of DC, and we're going to put the uh, website links so that you can check it out yourself. They have a wealth of resources, books, materials that they have available about constellations in English, as well as courses for those that are interested in becoming professional facilitators, such as myself, and workshops that you can become a client if you'd like. The information is here. And I personally want to mention that I just completed the foundational training at the Hellinger Institute with Susan, and it was an unforgettable experience. I learned an incredible amount, and I'm still digesting all the teachings and the wisdom that she has put together and imparted for us. And before I bring her on, I want to mention a special something that we're doing tonight. We're going to have a drawing for you that are interested in having an individual one-on-one online consultation with me for constellations. If you'd like, we're going to be giving one of those away. All you have to do is go to our website, which is spiritreflections.org/constellations. And I'm going to put the link right here and in the comments. And you have to fill out the form completely and submit. We're going to be doing a drawing, and the winner will receive an email for us to schedule this one-on-one individual online consultations for constellations. And so, in addition to family constellations today, we're going to be also examining how the connections between spirit release therapies and practices when we feel the influence of spirit entities in our lives, how can that be detected through the work of constellations? How are they similar and how are they different? That'll be in the second part of our conversations tonight. But first, let's learn about Susan, her personal and spiritual journey, and then we'll take your questions here. Susan, good evening and welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you inviting me.
It's an honor to have you around the fire on Spirit Reflection, Susan. So, for people to get to know you a little bit more, why don't we start from the beginning?
Okay. Well, I started out as a dental hygienist cleaning teeth. So my area of focus was inside the mouth.
Gotcha.
And then I became aware of nutrition and how important nutrition was for the health of the gums and the teeth. And so I studied nutrition and jumped to the body. Then I became aware of the energy field, and I jumped to the energy field and tried to learn everything I possibly could. Touch for Health is a healing modality that teaches muscle testing based on the Chinese acupuncture meridians. And I learned that. And then I realized that you could not practice it. It's not you don't get a license in doing touch for health. So I decided I would become a massage therapist. I took a 5-day deep tissue massage class. And at the end of the 5 days, I was so beaten up and bruised. I decided this was just way too much for me.
It's very physical, right?
Yeah, but this teacher also taught polarity therapy.
Polarity therapy.
Polarity therapy. And it is a really amazing healing modality that encompasses the chakra system, and it's just phenomenal. And
is it like Reiki, where you touch the body?
It is touch, but it is based on so much more. It's based on the chakra system. It's based on the auric field. It's based on energy lines. And basically, it divides the body electrically, positive, neutral, and negative. So what we're doing is balancing the upper part of the body to the middle part of the body to the lower part of the body, just for balance. It's really amazing.
I believe the Chinese, the Taoists, also do the division of the body in these 3 sections, right? The lower, middle, and upper.
Yes, and the Tanden. Yes.
Right.
And this this particular therapy, I opened up my practice in April 1st, April Fool's Day, 1985.
Wow.
and had a thriving practice when I met Barbara Brennan and realized I really needed to study with her. And so I ended up going to the Barbara Brennan School of Healing, where I became a teacher for a number of years afterwards.
She has a tremendous book called Hands of Light, I believe,
Hands
right?
of Light, yes.
In Brazil is extremely popular. Ever since it was first published, it's a reference. It's a seminal work that is very respected in Brazil as well.
That's great, because I knew her before the book actually got published.
Oh, okay.
She sent me her manuscript. I heard about the book and I sent off a check for it, and then she didn't get published right away, so she sent me her manuscript. And I said, no, I gotta do this. So
got it. And since we are stopping in so many different modalities, I'd love it if we could get a little bit of a taste of each, if you don't mind. For example, in Barbara Brennan, where were the sources that she was able to draw from in order to develop her own modality? Do you know?
Well, basically, it came from the chakra system, which is, thousands and thousands of years old. Where you can't really pinpoint where it comes from,
right?
Because there's been so many great teachers in the past that have talked about it.
Right.
But what she did was, because she was clairvoyant, she could utilize her clairvoyance in order to see what was going on in people's bodies. And she started that school to teach people how to see.
So it's a combination of psychic abilities, mediumship, if you will, combined with a greater sensitivity or sensibility and awareness of people's energies.
Yes. And I think she would say that she wanted to just open up your higher perception in all your different modalities.
Got it.
From touch to sight to hearing.
So on an intuitive level, perhaps, right? Work
Absolutely.
on your intuition. Got it.
Absolutely. And I think that that's what made her school so unique. And from there, I studied with 4 different teachers in Kabbalistic healing, which is Jewish mysticism. And then I became aware of Capital University of Integrative Medicine. So I became a graduate there.
Before we get to the university, just a quick question on Polarity Touch for Health, Barbara Brennan, the setting in which you you saw clients? Was it in a setting like a sort of massage bed, and you were
Oh
doing
yes, I
harmonization of their chakras?
my healing room was basically a massage table
Got it.
and a small table that I kept all my tools, the tuning forks, the flower essences, the essential oils. It's
Nice.
so I had a lot of tools available,
Got it.
and and um, at Capital University of Integrative Medicine, I
Hmm.
also became aware of Dietrich Klinghardt. So I went and studied with Dietrich Klinghardt, who was a German physician on the cutting edge of healing. And in the very last weekend, the very last day of his 3-day weekend, he invited some German women in to demonstrate family constellations.
Oh, I see.
And I was not happy. I had spent a lot of money to fly across from one coast, from Washington, D.C. to Washington State to study with him. And he
Hmm.
was bringing in other women, and they didn't even speak English, and I was just sitting in the back row, fuming.
Curious,
And
Susan, take us back a couple steps, if you don't mind, for a quick second. What prompted you to do this trip, to
ah,
see him and participate in his workshop? What called you to it?
he has a very honed in way of muscle testing that he calls ART. Um,
Okay.
I forget what it stands for, but
Okay.
he oh, his way of muscle testing tunes into the brain because he's a physician, and he
Hmm.
can tune into the brain to the specific neurotransmitters that are out of sync, and he's really amazing. So I was drawn to study with him.
And does he use tools like tuning forks or like physical tools, or is it all on
Um,
an intuitive level?
he uses your body to diagnose itself through testing, muscle
Got it.
testing.
Got it.
And he has vials of all types of, you know, different herbs,
Herbs.
and he's very much a natural healer from Germany.
Got it.
And the last afternoon, he had wanted to expose the people there to family constellations. And so I'm sitting in the back row, not a happy camper, and I get chosen as a granddaughter in this constellation in which the grandfather had been excluded. And at that point in time in constellations, you were not able to move or to speak unless you were directed by the
So,
facilitator.
for context, for those that are listening, if you are chosen to be in the circle where the representations take place, then you volunteer to get out of your chair and stand up and go into this field of representation. And at the time that you're describing this moment, nobody could say a word, right? They just had to
Exactly.
sit, be in silent there.
You just experience what you experience. And so I was sort of on the periphery, really, because I wasn't a focal point of the constellation. They were bringing the grandfather back in. And so the facilitator went around and asked how everybody was doing. And I was the last one because I was not, I was just the granddaughter. But the whole time I was welling up with tears. I was, I, I was so emotional that as soon as she said, "What would you like to do? Do we need to say anything? Do you need to do anything?" I ran across the room and I jumped in this man's arms, the grandfather, and burst into tears. And it
Wow.
was like the culmination of this constellation. And I was so emotional. I walked back through the first row to the second row to the third row, sat down. By the time I sat in my chair, I was not emotional at all.
It
And I
just
realized
evaporated, just
something
disappeared.
really powerful just happened, and I need to know more. And I'm so grateful to Dietrich for introducing me to this back in 98.
Definitely.
That this was, I started directing my whole life towards this.
And I'm curious, Susan, back in 1998, with all the baggage that you had acquired up until that point in healing modalities, what were you rationalizing in your head in the moments right after you returned to your seat? What were you associating the experience with? Was it, did you feel some type of channeling? Was it some kind of empathic
It felt
resonance?
it felt like I had stepped in somebody else's shoes and felt like exactly how they were feeling. And then when I stepped out of that representation, went back to my chair, I was myself again. And I thought, this is amazing. How did this all happen? And I
Right.
needed to learn more. About the same time that I embarked on trying to figure out how to learn more about constellations, I was also exposed to the Carolyn Mine's book, Releasing Emotional Patterns with Essential Oils,
Mm.
which I use almost every day in my healing practice. And for the for a very long time, I kept them totally separate. They were like two tracks. My healing practice that evolved mainly into clearing emotions, and my family constellation track, which was clearing the patterns that of energy that were blocked between the different family members.
And I understand this is such a pivotal tool, such a central tool that incorporates your toolkit with Constellation nowadays. That I
Mhm.
am putting the link of the book below for people
Oh,
to
good.
check it out afterwards. I'm also sharing the screen for those that are watching this on video. It's available on Amazon. Carolyn Mine, Mein is her last name, Releasing Emotional Patterns with Essential Oils. There you go.
And she's put out a book in Portuguese, but it needs to be tweaked a little bit. So
Good to
maybe
know.
a few more months, it'll be in much better shape.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so when we are talking about the essential oils, and how did you get connected to that, and how did you
Mm.
realize you could bring that into constellations? I'm curious about that process.
Yeah, I became aware of essential oils on the first trip I took to Egypt,
Okay.
and I bought a lot of oils and brought them home and would play with them, and I just didn't really understand that much about them. But I knew I never liked lavender, and lavender's with everything. And I
Interesting.
didn't understand it till I got Carolyn's book, and the emotion that lavender is associated with, at least one of the places, one of the emotions is abandonment. And it made perfect sense in my life because my mother had gone into the hospital 3 months after I was born.
Oh
And
wow.
and by the time she was out of the hospital, out of a body cast and out of a back brace, able to hold me, I was the big sister because my brother was born.
How old were you
So
then?
almost 3.
Oh wow. So you had the first 3 years, which are so important to develop that bond
Yeah,
with the mother. You didn't have that nurturing physically, right?
right. And that's what made me the classic schizoid character structure that's in Barbara Brennan's book. In her second book, I was the example that she used in writing up the schizoid character structure because I didn't have a mother. You know?
Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because mental health is such a big topic nowadays, and so many people are getting diagnosed with some part of the spectrum of schizophrenia,
Yeah.
and it's such a misunderstood condition. So I'd love to hear a little bit
Good.
more how Barbara Brennan structures this classic case.
Yeah. It's all based on where your initial wounding was along in your developmental stage. So the schizoid character structure was either uh, in the womb or shortly after birth,
Mm,
during the birthing process or shortly after birth. And then the other character structures were later on in the developmental stage. So my wounding was very early.
got it.
And since abandonment was my big issue, I sat down with Lavender, with Carolyn Mine's book, and started clearing all of my abandonment issues. And I think that's what kept me out of my body a lot, because I wasn't connected to mother,
And I
initially.
recall in one of our courses that you taught over the many weekends that we did together, you had mentioned that being out of our body is like a defense mechanism when we can't cope, and
Exactly.
we escape the body and we're sort of floating out there, and there's ways to ground and come back, and constellation is one of those tools, right?
Yes. And clearing the emotions, I think, is even more important.
With the
Um,
essential oils, for example,
mhm.
right?
Yes, and actually it was Barbara Brennan that helped me come down into my body, and I remember her saying to me at one healing, "Welcome to planet Earth," you know,
Wow.
because I felt like I was 20 feet above my head, you know.
And
I never touched ground.
I can definitely empathize with that feeling. I feel like I'm out there much more than in my body too. Curious for those that have never experienced a healing modality by Barbara Brennan, Susan, is that something that people sit in a chair in front of the
No,
healer and they?
it's all on a table. And we start at the feet and we walk up the body, clearing out anything that doesn't belong to you. And then she has other healing um, techniques,
Right.
protocols, if you want to call them that. And I sort of go back between polarity therapy and what I learned at the Brennan School, and a little Jin
Got it.
Shin Jyutsu if they need it, and and all the other healing modalities I've learned along the way.
Speaking of those, I think this would be a good time for us to open this door onto spiritist healing practices, such as
Hmm.
laying on of hands, or passes as they are called, which
Hmm.
incorporate a lot of the Barbara Brennan and Reiki principles, with the difference that you're not really touching the client,
Yes.
you're just standing at a relative distance.
Hmm.
And it's Christian based, so there's a lot of prayer and evocation involved mentally, for the presence of guardian angels and spirit mentors to help us be a good vessel and a conduit for the energies to go through our hands into the centers of force, also known as chakras, of course,
Right.
onto the client. And in addition to that, you mentioned that as you go from the foot up the body in the Barbara Brennan method, you clear out anything that doesn't belong to the person. And in
Yes.
this spiritist world, this is something that they actively do as well, where in the clearing of the centers of force in the beginning, they disperse the energy to clear the chakras first, and then they start to infuse each chakra with the healing energy that comes through them. It's not
Yes.
from them only, but it
Right.
comes through them more importantly. If and when there are situations when the person is connected to a spirit entity, this is a moment when that spirit entity, which is always addressed as a brother or sister in Christ in a loving way, and not as a demon that needs to be shunned or exorcised
Hmm.
away like a
Hmm.
plague, then they are asked, the group is asked through prayers for that entity to be taken to an area of healing, to an outpost, to an emergency room in the spirit realm, where the mediums in the group are either going to be directly talking to that spirit through trance channeling,
Hmm.
automatic writing, or even many cases in out of body experiences. And these are more advanced places that we are aware that exist, where some of the mediums will have that ability to go out of their bodies during the meeting in a conscious waking state as sort of astral projections. And
Hmm.
when it also happens is during the night when people go home and sleep, they'll report having very similar dreams when they were continuing sort of phase two of the healing work with those entities, all in the benefit of the person who received originally that passes, the laying on of hands, right?
Yes.
So I'm bringing all of this up in the context of what you discussed in Barbara Brennan School, to ask if in those many years of sessions that you did in the different healing modalities, if during the diagnosis of the body and using the body as a tool to diagnose, if you felt those sort of interferences from spirit entities, and how you dealt with that.
Yes. In assessing the energy field, um, there were times when you just knew that there was, you can call it an entity, some people call it a critter, I mean, it was, and from what I learned from Ethel Lombardi, who taught MariEL, which is an offshoot of Reiki, that you do a pull out. So if it's an energy that just doesn't belong there, you just reach in and you pull it out. And what I realized at times, sometimes there was an entity that was pretty active and didn't like the fact that I was extracting it from its food source, you know.
Yes,
And
exactly.
what I ended up doing was transmuting it into light. So the white light comes down to my heart chakra, out through my arm, totally encompass this. And I also took it to I used to have a pole lamp that looked like a chakra at the top,
Oh,
and
nice.
I'd put it over the pole lamp, and as soon as all of it turned into light, I'd let it go,
You release it.
and it transmuted into light. So that's how I tend to deal with it.
Beautiful. And in those situations, did you notice that the client reported anything
Oh,
in that they were
relief,
feeling or sensations, right?
relief. Like there was always something heavy here,
Heavy.
or I always heard this voice that was telling me to do something that I didn't want to do,
Right.
And so once you release that entity, the person feels so much better, because then it's more of them. It's their energy
Their
field.
energy. Less of
Yeah.
what I heard also described by Thomas Kratzley from Lilydale up in upstate New York.
Oh
He
yeah.
calls it interdimensional codependency.
Yeah. Great terms.
It's a
Uh-huh.
great term, because
Yeah.
sometimes in the spiritist world where I come from, there tends to be a finger pointing tendency where we call these entities obsessors. They are obsessing,
Yeah.
feeding off of our energy,
Yeah.
as if they are the ones who are the perpetrators and we are the victims only. And it's
Mm-hmm.
much more nuanced than that. We
Sure.
many times are the ones that are
We
holding on
attract
to
it.
them.
We attract
Yeah,
it, and
absolutely.
so it's a co-creation, and only when the person doesn't need it anymore is when somebody comes along and can take it off.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Susan, you mentioned another healing modality that I wonder if we could talk briefly about, which is Jin Shin
Jin
Jyutsu.
Shin Jyutsu. It's a Japanese healing modality that Mary Burmeister brought back from Japan to this country and started teaching it. And it's a very powerful. I'm a beginner, even though I've studied it for a number of years. I really consider myself a beginner, but I find it really, really helpful. And the most helpful aspect that I have found is I can't even remember the terms, but I hold all of my fingers in the morning, starting with the ring finger,
Hmm.
and then you go to the thumb, index, middle, and pinky finger,
Thank you.
and then you do the palm
The center
with
of the palm.
all four of your all five of
Sort
your
of
fingers
rub
together,
it in a
right?
circular motion for those that are
And
just
you're
listening.
and you hold each of these positions for 3 breaths. So they call it the 36 breath. You breathe in and breathe out 3 times in each of these positions. And if you think about it, in polarity therapy, all of these fingers have energy lines running through them.
Right.
All of your fingers have acupuncture meridian lines running through them. And it's a great way to start your day.
Nice.
There is a whole cosmology based on Jin Shin Jyutsu. Basically, you start from source and it splits into positive and negative, or masculine and feminine,
Yin
and then
yang.
it comes down, and then it manifests down into the chakras, and in the meridians. And so
Nice.
it's another whole healing modality that I need to spend a lot more time with.
And you mentioned is kind of an offshoot from Reiki, right?
Um, um, MariEL
MariEL.
is an offshoot. Ethel Lombardi, who started MariEL, had been a Reiki master and one of the top ones in the country. And then she broke off and started her own, and said that the reason I never studied Reiki is because after I graduated from her class, I naively said to her, "So you think I should study Reiki now?" And she says, "Well, why would you? If her form of energy was a higher frequency, why would you study Reiki?"
Right.
And I
Right.
never did, So, and what's really interesting is that's the form that everybody knows about, besides
Beautiful.
acupuncture. Reiki, everybody knows Reiki, at
Yeah.
least by name.
Exactly. And so we are now back in 1998. You're in the West Coast in Washington State, and Dietrich is the one who's facilitating this constellation workshop.
Yeah.
You have a very powerful experience as you enter the representation of a granddaughter in somebody else's family constellation. You enter the field, as we call it. And
Yes.
as you start to go back to your seat, you go back to your normal state. And at that point, your heart, your essence, your mind gives you a really loud calling, right?
Absolutely. And you need to learn more. You need to know more about this. Unbeknownst to me, that, back then in the late 90s, we didn't have internet and cell phones and all that. And I really had to use telephones and figure out how to figure out what was going on in the world.
Got it.
And it turns out that Bert Hellinger was coming to Washington, D.C. for a 2-hour workshop as part of a comprehensive cancer care conference.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, it was in a time of year that I was quite sick, probably from allergies, but may have been the flu, and I couldn't even drag myself out of bed to go to it.
It's like springtime, May, April.
Oh, yeah, it was just awful. And so it turns out he was coming for several years to that same conference. And when I realized he was going to the conference the next year, I was there. At the same time, I found out he was going to be in DC at that conference on Thursday, and on Saturday and Sunday, he was doing a workshop in New York City.
Okay.
So Friday, we took the train up, and we were at that workshop.
Nice.
And they announced that they were going to, it was amazing to watch the master work. And I was scared silly, because some really amazingly heavy energies came in when somebody represented an SS officer, in a constellation that had the energy of Holocaust in it. It was more than my energy field could handle. It just didn't feel good, you
And
know?
that was during the weekend workshop in New York, right?
Yes.
And on the Thursday cancer conference, it was more of a theoretical
He
talk that he
actually
gave.
he actually was doing constellations for people who had cancer.
I see.
And I realized at that point, this man is a warrior. He can
Indeed.
tell someone, you know, do
He doesn't
you?
mince words.
Not at all. And he spoke the truth. And somebody said, "Well, I have cancer," with a smile in their face, you know?
Hmm.
And he would make a comment about it, you know, "Well, are you afraid of cancer?" "No." And his comment would be, "You should be," you know? And instead of putting up something else, he put up a representative of death for that person. You know,
Yeah.
it was very shocking to my system to see someone be so truthful, you know, and
Right.
so honest with what he saw. And that encouraged me to learn more, you know. So when
Gotcha.
I went up to that workshop in New York, they Harold Honan had announced that they were going to be having their first training in the United States. And I was wringing my hands. Oh my God, how am I going to tell my husband I'm going to be spending another 6 weeks away, you know, 6 weekends away in New York, you know, and the money is cling, cling, cling,
Right.
you know, how
Right.
much I'm spending. And, you know, by the time I went over and put my name on the list, my husband's name was first on the list.
How
So
come?
he had decided he was going to do it too.
Oh, wow. So he went up with you to the workshop to
Mhm.
observe, and he was the first one to be convinced that this was
Yes.
incredibly. Wow.
Yes. So
So he
we
did the
actually
training with you.
he did the
Amazing.
training and we taught for a number of years together, along with Dale Schusterman, our friend and chiropractor from the area.
Which I think, as a side comment here, is extremely important as as a starting facilitator. If you're in the beginning journey, to do this in partnership with somebody else to co-facilitate, in order for you to be able to hold a larger container, if you will,
Yes.
psychically, for the healing to take place. Right.
Yes. For several reasons. One, I couldn't hold the energy all day long for a whole group by myself
Right.
initially. Um, and I could only do one or two constellations a day. And at that point, we were doing between 6 and 8 from, you
Wow.
know, from 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, whatever it was. And nowadays, you know how long it takes the
Yeah,
constellations,
I
you
was
know?
just thinking about that, Susan. In the beginning, it seems like they were much shorter constellations because it seems to
Yeah.
me, correct me if I'm wrong, Bert didn't progress a lot in the inner movements of the family system. He only allowed one or two and said, let's stop here, right?
Right. And what I found out recently is it used to be said that you only need one constellation your whole life. And I never understood that until I heard one of the Bert's original students say, well, when he first started out, all he did was line up your family in order, like what we did in the
Right,
first module, you know, put everybody in order, and that's your constellation. So
right.
if that's all you do for somebody, it's a constellation, you know?
And
And
perhaps
then
we could,
later on, he became aware of energy
right.
and the energy movements. And then it moved from family constellations to movements of the soul to movements of the spirit mind.
Got it. Which is different layers of consciousness that simultaneously influence and act upon us, right?
Yes.
So back to the order part, if we could just indulge for a couple of minutes on this concept for people that are not aware of it, could we go into a little bit about this concept of order and constellation and why it's
Sure.
so important?
Sure. It's based on the principles that those who come first need to be honored. And so in a relationship, a couple's relationship, they come together at the same time, okay? So they are equal in timing, okay? If that couple has children, then it becomes who's first, who's second, and then the children in order, first, second, third, fourth. And when everything is in order energetically, you can feel it. Everyone feels it. Just like when a constellation is finished and there's nothing more to do, everyone feels it, feels content,
a
feels
conclusion.
complete. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And this order even influences the seating around the dinner table or the position that the spouses lie in bed, right?
Yes. It's based on the clockwise movement. The first person usually is the male in a heterosexual relationship because that's the provider and the protector of the family.
Right.
Next comes the wife and the mother because she's the nurturer of the family,
right,
of children. And then the children are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many there are.
in the order of birth.
Mm-hmm. And I now have a clock face that will show if you start at 12, this is the order.
Right.
You know?
And so if you have a big rectangular dining room table in your house, the correct order energetically is for, in this example you just gave, the father provider at the head, and clockwise from there, the wife and the children filling the seats accordingly, right?
Or he could be sitting in the middle of the table and still do it in the clockwise order. As long as everybody's in order, it doesn't matter where they start.
Fantastic.
You know, some people like to have the wife and the mother closest to the kitchen door. So wherever that corner is of the table is where she sits.
Right. Okay, so then the order includes grandparents and previous romantic relationships we've had in this lifetime, right?
Yes. Yes. All of our former partners need to be honored. Anyone that you've had sexual intercourse with becomes a member of your family.
That's
and
very powerful. Very
they
important.
all need to be honored. If someone is not honored, then some of your children in a subsequent generation or maybe a second generation will identify with them to bring them back into the system.
And it's not necessarily that they were overtly excluded, but the fact that they were merely not honored, that alone produces this potential identification entanglement, right?
It's an attitude. It wasn't something that someone I used to love. It was just a one night stand, you know?
Right.
But that one night stand may be causing problems with your son or your daughter, you know?
And the question that I would ask for people that are listening and are not sure how to honor is, what do I do in order to honor them?
Basically, you say, I honor you as a former partner. I take responsibility for my part, and please bless me when I take another. And so you're honoring them. You're taking your responsibility for the part that you played in the relationship not working out, and then asking for blessing to move on to your next partner.
And you use your imagination to visualize this scene play out with the partner in front of you, right?
Or you can do it with Playmobil figures, or you can do it with real people in workshops, which I've done both.
Thousands of times, I'm sure, which is part of your legacy, which I think is important to highlight. you have not only hosted so many workshops that have helped so many families, but you also have trained and are training thousands of people all over the world to become facilitators themselves, so that this ripple effect can multiply and bring the much needed conscious healing that families need. What I love about constellations is that you're not only addressing something on an individual level, but there's a ripple effect that happens automatically with your whole family system, which is really powerful.
Absolutely. Many generations back and many generations forward. As the
It's
Native
fantastic.
Americans say, 7 generations back and 7 generations forward.
And speaking of Native Americans, that's where Bert Hellinger got most of his insights from, observing the Zulu tribes in Africa, right?
Yes, and they honor their ancestors. Never spoke a negative word to any of their parents. And he found that quite interesting, coming from the Western culture
Right.
where we don't do that so much.
No, especially in the US, there's a big tendency to badmouth our parents and just sort of blame them for all the things that are wrong in our lives, how they didn't raise us right. It almost becomes a cultural norm to mock that, right?
Well, and in the 1990s, there was a book called The Toxic Parents, and they told you to stay away from your parents.
Oh wow.
It was terrible. And I'm reading all of this stuff, and on some level, it doesn't feel right. And then I met Bert Hellinger, and he's telling you to turn around and embrace your parents. It's
Right.
like, whoa.
And there's something incredibly revolutionary in Bert's work about turning around and embracing our parents, which includes not even forgiving them, because as a child,
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
the mere notion or attitude that you're entitled to forgive your parents is arrogant to begin with, right?
Absolutely.
Could you speak a little more about that, please?
Yes. In every form of religion, forgiveness is a big deal, right?
Right.
They talk about it. You're supposed to turn the other cheek, and when Bert first talked about it, he said, no, 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 no. You say, I forgive you, and you be the one that's forgiven. And what we watched was the person who was forgiving became bigger and better than, really puffed up their energy.
Superior.
I'm better than you, right? And what you really want is equal to equal, adult to adult human beings. And so rather than saying, I forgive you, it's better to say, I agree to it, because that's coming adult to adult. Okay? Whatever happened, I agree to it because it
I
happened.
agree to it. Right. So it's not only between parents and children, but also between siblings and
And
past
partners.
spouses
Hmm.
and partners, right?
And current partners,
And current partners.
I mean, today we had a little spit, like
Right.
it's the way it
It
is.
I think it comes from that place of radical acceptance within, where you don't try to change them or you try to impose your will on them, and
Yeah.
you just agree, and it flows better this way, right?
It makes life so much easier when you can do that.
And
We can't do it moment to moment. We keep trying, but
so back to this movement of turning around to look at your parents and honor them. If all constellations achieved in our mass culture was that movement, I think that alone would be tremendously healing, right?
absolutely. And the reason for that is the only way we can get the energy of love that comes through all of our ancestors has to come through our parents. So if we cut off that energy from our parents, we cut off the energy of all of our ancestors.
Yeah,
And you want that energy from the source of life to come through. And the only way you can get it is to honor your parents. And
yeah.
people say to me, I can't honor my father. He was abusive to me. Well, You only honor him for giving you life. The 10 Commandments say, honor thy mother and thy father. They don't say you have to love them. They don't say
Exactly.
you have to like them. You honor them because he's your father and he gave you life.
That is such an important difference, and it took a while for me to understand it. And it
Yes.
makes once you get it, it's a burden off. It's a huge weight off your shoulders, right?
Yeah.
It's a
Yes.
friend of ours that's watching, Mark from California, and he's just making a comment that says forgiveness includes forgiving self as well as forgiving others, right? Guilt and rancor.
Yes. And if you think about it, it's agreeing to who you are as a human being, that you're a wonderful spark of the divine, just the way you are. And
Right.
so it's accepting yourself. You know?
And there's all of these movements that we do in our life as attempts to reconnect with our parents when we are acting in some way disconnected, or that we haven't found in our hearts a place to include them because we have resentments and all of these things. And one of the things that I learned from studying with you and constellations is that when there is this spiritual quest in our lives to seek spirituality, that in fact we are really seeking a connection with our father of origin, our dad,
Yes.
right? And in addition to that, and this is the part that really threw me off, is Bert says if you are facing a challenge like a disease, and instead you seek a spiritual path, you miss the point.
Exactly. Because
Could you
that's your
say a little more
teacher.
about that?
Yes.
Yes, that was
Yes.
incredible. Earth
Yes.
shattering when I read it.
Yes. And for me as well, because I was a spiritual seeker, you know, I was looking. I went through my nightstand had books on it that were in every Native American and every type of spiritual um, teachings that I could find. And the moment that I met Bert Hellinger and had some of these realizations and turned and accepted my parents just the way they are, not the way I wanted them to be, just the way they are, I stopped seeking. I was going from here to there, every workshop, every spiritual teacher that I could go see and have them put their hands on me or whatever. And as soon as I connected with both my mother, but especially my father, because I had it within already. I had that connection already, but it came through my ancestors all the way back to the source of life through my parents.
It's such a earth shattering attitude change, which
Yeah,
can shift everything around you, right?
absolutely.
So we talked about order, how important order is. We talked about this concept of forgiveness in constellation, how we as the children, we don't get to forgive the ones that came before us
Right,
because we're small. We just take from them, right?
right,
And they give.
right. And that's giving and taking. Parents give and children take. In every other relationship, it's give and take back and forth, but not in the parent child relationship.
Right.
You turn around and you pass life on, and that's how you give back to the world.
And when this flowing of life gets somehow stuck in us, that's when diseases can develop, right?
Absolutely. And
And
in polarity therapy, I learned you go from one point to another point to get the flow going. And when I jump to the family system and see all of the ancestors, you can see where the energy is blocked, and you just have to figure out how to unblock it. Is it movement? Is it a word, a phrase, a sentence, or is it clearing that emotional pattern? that allows the energy to flow freely.
Right. And there is even a mention that Bert had regarding cancer specifically, right? In many examples of breast cancer, where this movement of the daughter not wanting to see the mother or bow down to the mother to take
Yes.
in the mother could cause the cancer, right?
Yes. Bert's comment that I learned in that very first cancer conference that I observed him in was, women would rather die than bow to their mothers. That's a pretty powerful statement when you
Yeah.
think about it. And it took me a long time to really grok what he meant by that. And if I'm better than my mother and I look down on my mother, that energy that's supposed to flow to me from my mother never gets to me. And that's a
Right.
huge energy block in the family system.
Right. And then when you do manifest the diseases in your body, you learn to take them in as your friend, as opposed to exclude or want to exclude it, the way family members and ancestors sometimes get excluded and cause these issues, right?
And sometimes that disease entity is representative of that excluded family member. And if that
Uh-huh.
family member is excluded back in, sometimes the disease just dissipates.
And sometimes that can even be children that were not able to be born, that were either aborted by natural means, like a miscarriage, or a
Mm-hmm.
forced abortion, right?
Mm-hmm. A medical intervention. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And all of them need to be honored. Everyone has a place, which is part
Yes.
of order. Everyone has their place, and their place needs to be honored.
And one of the things that Bert caused a big ruckus in the beginning, especially coming in the United States, is this integration between the victims and the perpetrators, especially when it came to World War II and Holocaust victims and Nazi perpetrators, right? I was wondering if you could maybe describe a little bit about that, how this plays out in us and in our family system, this victim perpetrator dynamic.
Well, I think we all have perpetrator victim energy within us,
Right.
and it gets played out with different people. You know, on some levels, I feel victimized by certain people, and on other levels, I feel I'm better than, which leads to being a perpetrator energy or aggressive energy if it's there long enough.
Right.
And so, in terms of perpetrator and victim energy, we look for it to see where it is in the family system, because we get entangled either with a perpetrator or with a victim. And then we carry that consciousness with us, and it's not even ours. So there's
Right.
ways to separate it and let it go, and then we can become ourselves. Now, we talked about little bit about schizophrenia earlier.
Right.
What Bert Hellinger said was, the person who is schizophrenic is identifying both with a perpetrator and a victim. So if you think identifying with a murderer and someone who was murdered and try to bring them together, yeah, that's pretty difficult. You know, it's it's a it's a pretty big task. And
Right.
so what he has said is, the person that we point our finger at in the family because they're institutionalized, or they act crazy, or they have to be on medication, because they're schizophrenic and we don't want them around, they have the most love for the family, Bert says, because they're attempting to heal the biggest split in the family between a perpetrator and a victim.
They're
And
trying to bring all the parts that belong and then have a place, and at some point were excluded through
yeah,
many situations,
and
right?
most of us would only take one part, and this person's taking both, to bring them together.
And in those cases, Susan, let's say there is a person suffering from severe schizophrenia. If they were to have a constellation session and you were to be able to pinpoint in their family line where this sort of schism comes from, and you do the proper movements to help resolve it, can their symptoms simply vanish, you think?
Um, I feel like their symptoms may be relieved a bit. Whether or not the disease process actually totally disappears may depend on how long they've had it, you
Right,
know, um, whether or not it and how much medication they took for 50 years,
right.
that sort of thing. Um, but the possibility exists. Wouldn't it be nice, you know,
Absolutely.
if the person could become and function more normally,
Yeah.
whatever
And I
normal is?
and I think in the world of constellations, it's so interesting for people that are watching this to maybe understand a little bit more the different layers and levels of consciousness that act upon us. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have the personal, individual one. That's the realm of quote unquote free will that we think we have.
Hmm.
Then there is the family conscience, which is the one we are a part of, whether we choose to be or not, whether we believe we belong in it or not. Genetically, we belong to it as family
Yeah,
of origin, our
right.
ancestors. And that has a conscience of itself, group conscience, right?
Yes, absolutely.
There's another one, but let's stick to these two for now. And I wanted to see if you could help us understand how this group conscience sometimes overrides, or many times overrides, our own individual, quote unquote, free will.
Yes. Um, when you're a member of that group, in order to belong to any group, but right now we're focusing on the family of origin, there's certain rules and regulations that you need to abide to in order to belong to that group. And if we go against that group, then they have the ability to throw us out of the group. And when we were tribes way back when, that was not a healthy thing to happen because there's saber-toothed tigers and, big elephants and God knows what else is going to eat us. So
Right.
we want to belong to that tribe. And children do anything to belong. They will do anything out of love for their parents, even dying for their parents. You know,
Sacrificing
it's
their
it's
own lives, right?
exactly for the love of their family, for the love of their parents. So this group conscience is really um, when I teach this in a workshop, I use one of those really thick, round exercise bands, and I
Mm-hmm.
put it around a person and have their family standing behind them, and they're pulling on it. So if the person can't move forward, you know, well, the truth is, in order for us to grow, we need to move beyond that family system.
Right.
Now, we don't step over that band, you know, in order to really grow, we just keep pushing and we end up pulling them with us. The whole family comes with us as
Right.
we grow. But that family system is really pulling us back with comments like, why should you go to college? We didn't go to college. Who do you think you are? You
Right.
know, why do you think you should learn to drive before you're married? We never learned to drive. These
Right.
kinds of attitudes that are part of the family system that come down and when I'm working, I'm listening for those sentences.
That just come through to you via your intuition.
Well, actually, sometimes the client mentions it.
Got it.
Like somebody said the other day, I have to stay. But the way she said it, That's not her voice.
Mm,
Who in your family said that way back when? And it's now imprinted in the family system that if you get married, you have to stay,
right.
and it's this imprinted energy that it's like the record, it
Right.
gets grooved really deep, and then, you just fall in step and you're part of the record. You know? But,
It's what Rupert Sheldrake calls morphic resonance.
right. You're part
That
of
the
the morphic field.
morphic field, it's literally vibrating on a genetic level in every cell of our body, whether it was our great great grandparents that had it imprinted, it doesn't matter. We on some level we will feel it, right?
Right. Well, we are our parents. We are our family, and I I chuckle that people graduate from high school or college and move as far away from home as they can. The East Coast, they move to the West Coast,
Right.
and they're out in California, but they
Yeah.
don't realize they're bringing their whole family with them because it's in here. It's
Right.
in our field. It's in that energy field that's around us that we
and
carry it with us.
And you had mentioned that Bert placed a big emphasis on honoring the dead and making sure that they are adequately seen. And if we believe in prayers and everything, that we do those
Yes.
kinds of rituals and movements of honoring them so that we can live in peace here.
Yes. I
And
think
that does have an influence in constellations, right?
absolutely. And it's important that the dead rest in peace. And when we look in constellations, you can see that sometimes the dead are not resting in peace. And there's an energy block that needs to be resolved so that they can rest in peace. And when they can, in a workshop setting, somebody's who representing someone who's dead will just automatically close their eyes and drift off.
In a peaceful way, right?
Very peaceful. You can feel it. There's a quality to it.
Another groundbreaking concept that I learned through constellations was the guilty versus innocent conscience,
Yes.
which I thought was brilliant. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yes. It's not what we think about you being guilty or innocent. Children are innocent. And in order for them to grow, they need to grow beyond the family system. And then they become guilty based on the family system. So
Based on this group conscience, right?
yes, yes. They do something that the family doesn't like, in order to, well, look at teenagers. They got to prove themselves. Like, I can
Right,
do it differently than you, Dad,
right.
Well,
So there's this understanding that when we step out of bounds from the traditional way that our family has done things for generations, we're not talking about what's right or wrong here. This
right,
is just the way a family does something, their
right,
customs. If we
right,
do it differently, we carry automatically an inner sense of guilt because
right.
we are risking not belonging to them by doing differently, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And versus staying and repeating or perpetuating patterns that are sometimes very unhealthy, I at least get to keep my innocent conscience with me because there's a kind of a passive victim way of saying, well, this is just how they do it, so I'm just going to do it myself like that, right?
Yeah. And you stay stuck. You don't grow.
Right, right,
You stay trapped in that
right,
family conscience,
right.
and your soul may be pushing you to move forward, but the family's pulling you back. You can't do
And
that.
And so how does like free will play a role in all of this? Because I used to think we had one. And
Yes,
after I studied a little bit of constellation, I started to question free will a little more.
yes, and I did too. I had a running conversation with Bert Hellinger. I asked him once about free will, and he said, "Oh, so what do you think of free will?" Well, and we got interrupted, and he somehow it never came up again. And I saw him a year later, and one of the first things he said to me is, "So, what do you think about free will? What have you learned about free will?" What I learned about free will is if I'm entangled with half a dozen of my family members, it's like I'm caught in a spider web and I'm acting like them. And do I really have free will if there's group conscience? You know, this family system that I belong to. And I've been working for the last 20 some years, breaking all of my entanglements and identifications. I'm probably freer than I ever have been, but I'm not so sure that I have total free will because I still belong to this family.
Would you say that this trajectory that you just described of 20 years of becoming aware of your entanglements and identifications and removing them gradually is kind of like Carl Jung's concept of individuation?
Absolutely. I think it's our growth cycle, you
Right,
know. I think it's a part of us becoming who we really are by
right,
letting go of the stuff that isn't ours.
right. You move away from mob mentality, tribe mentality, or in this case, group
Yeah,
conscience mentality by
yeah,
reenacting unconsciously everything that they used to do. And you're not even aware that it's coming from them because the free will that you think you have is so connected to this group conscience
yeah,
that the personal one plays a very small role in the dynamics, right? And as you
exactly.
and through constellations, as you do more of these and learn about it and discover more about yourself, and you start to realize what belongs to you personally versus what is an identification or an entanglement with a loved one or an ancestors, and you're able to break that. That's why they say this is not therapy. You do a
Right.
movement and just wait a few weeks, a few months for things to shift, right?
Yes. I consider this soul work
Soul work.
that has an effect on our physical and emotional bodies. But this is soul work. This is much higher spiritual work than is perpetuated out there.
Definitely. And for those that are interested in seriously becoming more acquainted and studying family constellations, I highly recommend the Hellinger Institute of DC and the training that Susan offers. The website is here, hellingerdc.com, for those that are just listening. And for those that are watching, here is the website that I'm putting on the screen. And I wanted to invite you, Susan. We have a few minutes left. For those that are watching us live, stay tuned till the end. Susan is going to guide us on a sort of healing visualization meditation at the end of our episode, so that we could experience some of the things that we've been discussing here, purely on a discursive level. And if we have any other questions, let me just take a look here. Um, Abigail is asking, what about the ones that is a push away from the family, meaning that we push them away, Abigail, or that they are pushed by us? Just curious. Um, in the extreme case, Susan,
Mm-hmm,
of Holocaust survivors and perpetrators, right?
mm-hmm.
Could you maybe give us an
Well,
example there?
I'll just give you an example of if someone is banished from the family. Let's say um, in this particular family, being um, loyal. I can't even remember the word. When you get married, you honor your vows, okay?
Right.
And then if one person goes off and has an affair, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But in this family, it's just the worst thing that could happen, okay?
Right.
So this person is banished from the family, okay? Somebody in a subsequent generation will identify with this person to bring them back in.
This quote
And
unquote black sheep.
exactly. And so they still belong. That's important. Then you have the case of where somebody just leaves. I don't want to be a part of this family. One of my brothers did that. I mean, he moved as far away as he could get, want nothing to do with the family. Well, when I looked at it in a constellation that Bert did for me, he was representing an excluded member of the family from further back, you know? And so just by working with him and loving him and letting him know that he belongs, he came back into the fold. So that's how
Sort
it
of
works. Sort of
systemic
dynamic.
magic.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Based on love, of course.
Definitely, including something quite incredible that I also learned, that you mentioned, that Bert said every movement is out of love. Every single one of them, including the self-sacrifice ones that may go as far extreme as suicide.
Yes.
When
Everything.
when the identification in those cases have to do with so many deceased members of the family, and there's a loyalty and a love for them, that the
Yeah.
soul yearns to be with them and will
Yes. Just
basically
just wants to be with them, you know? So in this work, I let them lie down on the ground next to them, just to be with them for a few more minutes. That's all they may need. And then I have them get up and say, I miss you. I'll always miss you. And when it's my time, I'll come too. But now I stay.
right,
And that is enough for them to know that they're heading in that direction, but it's not their time, you know?
right. Yeah, it's quite
So,
powerful. And I also want to, one last time before we go to our final part of our episode here, remind people that if you are interested in winning a individual online family constellation session with me, I'm going to give one of that away. And all you have to do is enter the drawing that we're going to be picking a winner in the next couple of days. We'll send an email to the winner. And all you have to do is go to spiritreflections.org/constellations. There's a form there that says, you can click a button that says work with Frederico, fill out a form and submit. And we will pick out a winner and schedule this individual online family constellations for those that are curious and would like to work on a particular issue or look at something related to their family. Susan, there's so much more we could talk about here, and I wish we had more time, but we don't. And I want to thank you so much for these this wonderful conversation. And hey, maybe there's a chance for us to do a sequel down the road at some point.
mhm.
But for tonight, if there's any final words you would like to leave us with before we go into our experiential conclusion that you're going to lead us.
Yes, I just want you to be aware that every individual is not just an individual. They come with their whole family system attached to them. And so when you look at someone, I want you to see their father behind their right shoulder and their mother behind their left shoulder. And if you do that, you cannot be angry at that person. Try it. It's worth trying. It makes a huge difference.
Beautiful. All right. Well, let's go to our experiential moment. And I will leave you here, Susan. I'm going to put some music for the background, and
Okay?
the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fred, for inviting me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So close your eyes and And feel your father standing behind your right shoulder and your mother standing behind your left shoulder. And behind them, their parents, your grandparents, on your father's side and your mother's side. And know that this goes on the next generation and the next generation. So I'm imagining that all of us here are sitting in a circle and just be aware of everyone's parents behind them in that circle. And then their grandparents. And just feel the connection going all the way back through your ancestors to the source of life. And allow that love to flow through all your ancestors. To your great-grandparents, to your grandparents, to your parents, and now to you. And allow yourself to fill up with the energy of love. And if you are a parent, allow it to flow to your children. And if you are a grandparent, allow it to flow through your children to your grandchildren. And just feel that love and light emanating through your whole energy field and the energy fields of all your ancestors behind you and your descendants in front of you. And we're just one link in the chain of humanity. Still holding on to that energy. Be aware of being in the room that you're in. And bring your conscious awareness back to that state. Still holding on to that energy of ancestral love. When you're ready, open your eyes. And imagine looking around the room at every one of us here and thanking them with your eyes for being here. And then look around the room again. And this time see their parents. and thank them for having the person that is sitting in the room with us now. And don't forget to thank your parents, the most important part.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here with us live, and for those that are watching this after. Susan, thank you so much for lighting up our fire on Spirit Reflections. I'm going to do our closing vignette. Don't go anywhere, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.